Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into osteoarthritis, or OA. It's something incredibly common, touches so many lives, yet, well, it has surprising depths that go way beyond just stiff joints. You're looking to get informed quickly but thoroughly. So think of this as your fast track to understanding OA in a way that really clicks.
Yeah, and our goal in this deep dive is really to explore a truly insightful blog post about osteoarthritis. We want to pull out the most important pieces, what it is, what kicks it off, and crucially, what we can actually do about it.
Okay.
This blog, it has a knack for explaining what can often feel like a really overwhelming condition in a way that, just makes sense.
Oh, okay. Let's get right into it then. What exactly is osteoarthritis? It's more than just that feeling of things getting a bit creaky with age, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
The blog post makes it clear that osteoarthritis is fundamentally a structural change. It happens within our synovial joints, and that's like the majority of the joints in your body.
Synovial joints.
Yeah, picture where two bones meet and move. These are usually enclosed in a joint capsule, and it's filled with synovial fluid.
Synovial fluid, that's the stuff that keeps things moving smoothly, kind of like oil in an engine.
Precisely. It lubricates, but it does more than that. It also delivers crucial nutrients to the articular cartilage.
Articular cartilage, that's the smooth stuff.
That's the smooth, glossy layer on the ends of those articulating bones.
Yeah. It's different from, say, fibrous cartilage, which is more about structure. Think meniscus, ribs, nose, ears, more rubbery.
Okay. Now, the blog post had a really interesting point about why this articular cartilage, the fact that it's white means it doesn't heal well. The example of Nana really brought this home for me.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that articular cartilage lacks a direct blood supply. Unlike muscles, it doesn't have that network to bring in oxygen and nutrients efficiently. It really relies on the synovial fluid.
Which isn't as effective for repair. So when articular cartilage gets damaged, like with Nana's knee in the example, it often doesn't bounce back perfectly. It just doesn't have the resources.
Right. And this leads to that idea of bone on bone, which I gather isn't quite a literal description.
Not really, no. When cartilage is damaged, the body tries to repair it. It tries to build new tissue.
Okay.
But instead of creating more of that smooth cartilage, it often lays down bone. And this extra bone isn't smooth and glossy, it's rough.
Ah, okay.
So that crunching and creaking sound you might hear in an osteoarthritic joint, that often comes from this buildup of rough bone as the joint tries to sort of stabilize itself. It's not just cartilage completely worn away.
That paints a much clearer picture, much better than just worn away.
Right.
So where in the body does this typically show up?
The blog post highlights the knees, hips, hands, and spine as the most common spots, and it definitely becomes more common as we get older.
Right.
Doctors usually diagnose it with an X-ray, which can show those telltale bony changes in the joint structure.
Okay, so that's the what. Now let's dig into the why. What actually causes osteoarthritis? The blog post lays out three main factors.
Yes, and the biggest one might surprise you: traumatic injury.
Injury? Really? Bigger than age?
It seems to be the biggest contributor to starting the process, yeah. Think about those hard landings, sudden twists, or even bad sprains. The impact of bones hitting each other can cause tears, or like divots in the articular cartilage.
Ouch.
Or it can even bruise the cartilage and the bone underneath. These initial injuries can really set the stage for OA to develop later on.
That totally tracks. You often hear about athletes having joint problems down the line. What's the second biggest piece of the puzzle then?
That would be genetics. The blog post talks about how our joints age, and a lot of that is influenced by our family history.
Right.
The personal example used, Nana had a hip replacement and so will I, really highlights that hereditary aspect. It's about the predisposition and how our joints are built and maybe how they naturally wear over time.
Definitely something many people can relate to, that family history element. And the third major contributor is BMI. Body mass index.
Yeah.
Now, most people probably think that's just about the extra weight, putting more stress on the joints. But the blog post suggests there's, well, a deeper connection.
Yeah, this is really interesting. It's not just the mechanical stress, though that's part of it, of course. What's fascinating here is the body-wide inflammatory effect of fat tissue, adipose tissue.
Inflammation.
From fat, yeah. Fat cells actually produce substances called cytokines, which are inflammatory molecules. This creates a kind of low-grade systemic inflammation throughout the body.
Wow.
And this systemic inflammation can irritate joints everywhere, which helps explain why individuals with higher BMIs also have a a higher rate of osteoarthritis in non-weight-bearing joints.
Like the hands.
The hands, that's really eye-opening. I wouldn't have immediately connected BMI and hand OA.
Exactly. It shows it's not just about the load on the joint. And the blog even mentions that this systemic inflammation can contribute to other serious health issues too.
Like what? Like heart attacks, for instance. The inflammation can contribute to the scarring and hardening of the arteries in the heart. It just underscores how interconnected all our systems are.
So thinking about weight isn't just about relieving mechanical stress on knees or hips.
Right. It's also about potentially tamping down a body-wide inflammatory fire that can affect your joints and even your heart.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good handle on what OA is and what drives it. Now let's tackle something that can be really confusing: the pain. The blog post discusses this pain paradox. What's the deal with that?
This is a really crucial point and often misunderstood. The common assumption is, if you have osteoarthritis on an X-ray, you're automatically in constant pain.
Yeah, seems logical.
But the blog post emphasizes that many people have arthritic changes in their joints visible on an X-ray, yet they don't actually experience any pain.
Really? None at all?
Sometimes none at all. The blog compares it to gray hair or wrinkles. It can be a sign of aging in the joint, but not necessarily painful in itself.
So just because there's some wear and tear showing up doesn't automatically equal pain.
Precisely. And even when an arthritic joint is painful, it often tends to come and go in phases. You might have soreness for a while, maybe weeks or months, and then it can disappear completely for a period.
Okay.
And what's even more striking, maybe the most important point here, is that the severity of pain doesn't always line up with how bad the joint looks on an X-ray.
So you can have really nasty looking X-ray, but not much pain.
Exactly. You can have joints that look quite damaged radiographically but aren't causing much trouble, and the opposite can also be true. Joints that look relatively okay on X-ray can be quite painful.
Yeah.
The key insight here, according to the blog, is that how your joint feels is often more about how your body perceives its ability to handle stress rather than just the raw X-ray picture.
Perception. Well,
This opens up a whole new way of thinking about managing OA.
that's really counterintuitive. So if the X-ray isn't the ultimate indicator of pain, what is? The blog post brings up this idea of vulnerability. What does that mean in this context?
So by vulnerability, we mean the body's sense of how stable and supported that joint is. The blog suggests that pain in an osteoarthritic joint is less about the actual structural damage and more about this perception how strong and supported the joint feels.
Like an internal assessment.
Kind of, yeah. Pain acts like an alarm system, right? Signaling potential danger or instability. And how sensitive that alarm is can vary hugely from person to person and even from day to day based on various factors.
And this explains why just resting a sore joint might not always be the best strategy. I mean, that's often the first instinct.
Exactly. The blog points out that often an arthritic joint can actually feel more painful after a period of rest.
More painful after rest. How?
Well, because the muscles around the joint might have become a bit weaker, maybe less toned, less supportive during that rest period.
Okay.
This makes the joint feel more vulnerable, biomechanically less secure, and that triggers the pain signal. The body's essentially saying, hey, be careful here, we're not feeling as stable as we could be.
This is a real shift in how I thought about joint pain. So if pain is linked to this feeling of vulnerability, what does that tell us about how we should approach treatment? What actually works?
It really reframes our perspective on managing osteoarthritis, doesn't it? The main goal becomes reducing that feeling of vulnerability. The blog post outlines several treatment approaches based squarely on this idea.
Okay.
Let's start with the role of weight loss, specifically looking at adipose tissue, the fat tissue.
Right, we touched on the inflammation connection.
Hmm.
And the numbers the blog post throws out are pretty significant, aren't they? Even a modest amount of weight loss can have a real impact.
Absolutely. Really striking numbers. The research mentioned showed that just a 5-kilogram reduction in weight, that's about 11 pounds over 10 years, decreased the likelihood of developing symptomatic knee OA by a remarkable 50%.
50%, wow.
Yeah. And when it comes to pain relief for people who already have OA, losing just 5% of your body weight can provide some noticeable benefit, while a 10% loss often leads to significant reductions in pain.
That's really encouraging. It highlights that even small, sustainable changes can make a big difference. Okay, what about exercise? I know the old advice used to be, take it easy on painful joints. Avoid stressing them.
Yeah, that advice seems outdated now based on this vulnerability idea. The blog strongly emphasizes the opposite. Stay as active as possible. Rest doesn't help in the long run.
So movement is key.
Movement is key. The idea is to build muscle mass and strength around the affected joint. Think of it as building a stronger, more active support system, like scaffolding.
Okay.
This directly reduces that feeling of vulnerability, makes the joint feel more secure. Both regular aerobic walking and exercises specifically targeting the quadriceps muscles, the big ones on the front of the thigh, have been shown to reduce pain and disability in knee OA.
So it's about strengthening the muscles around the joint to make it feel more stable and less vulnerable? That makes perfect sense.
What about more immediate ways to manage the pain itself when it flares up, like short-term relief? Yeah, for managing symptoms day to day, the blog mentions the common options. Things like paracetamol, applying heat packs, sometimes using supportive taping techniques, or wearing neoprene sleeves. These can all provide some level of comfort and relief during flare-ups.
Okay. And then there's the topic of surgery. I think a lot of people see that as the ultimate fix, the end goal maybe. What does the blog post have to say about surgical options?
Well, the research the blog highlights around arthroscopic tidy-up surgeries is quite interesting. Keyhole surgery.
The clean-out procedures.
Exactly. It suggests that these procedures often aren't any more effective in the long run than just following a well-structured exercise program.
Really? No better than exercise.
In many studies, yeah. Often, the benefit people experience after such surgery actually comes from the intensive exercise and rehabilitation they do afterwards, rather than the surgical intervention itself.
That's really good information to have. It might challenge what a lot of people assume. What about full joint replacement then? When is that considered the right step?
Joint replacement, where the damaged bone and cartilage are actually removed and replaced with artificial components, is really seen as an option for severe pain. Pain that can't be managed effectively through weight loss, exercise, and other conservative measures.
So when other things haven't worked.
Right, and specifically when that pain is significantly limiting your ability to walk distances you need to, or it's consistently disrupting your sleep, those are often the key indicators.
Makes sense.
The blog also mentions that replacements typically last quite a while now, maybe around 25 years on average, but it advises against rushing into it prematurely because it is major surgery.
And it sounds like it's a pretty significant recovery process afterwards, not a quick fix.
Absolutely not. The rehabilitation period is substantial. It can take anywhere from 3 to 12 months before the leg feels completely normal again, before you regain full function and strength.
A whole year, potentially.
Potentially, yes. And while replacements are generally very effective at relieving the pain, the blog points out something important. They don't necessarily lead to a significant improvement in overall activity levels compared to before the severe pain set in.
So pain goes, but you might not suddenly become way more active.
Not necessarily, no. People often adapt their lifestyles around the pre-surgery limitations. It also notes, interestingly, that hip replacements tend to have a somewhat easier overall recovery compared to knee replacements.
Okay. So the key takeaway on surgery seems to be that it's a last resort for really severe pain and functional limitations. And even then, it's not a guaranteed ticket back to, say, running marathons and involves serious rehab.
Precisely. The blog really frames it as a solution for when the pain is so intense that you can barely walk or it's consistently keeping you awake at night and other options are exhausted.
This has been incredibly helpful in understanding OA much more deeply. To recap then, it sounds like osteoarthritis is, well, it's a complex process. It involves structural changes in the joints, sure, but it's influenced heavily by our history of injuries, our genes, and that systemic inflammation linked to BMI. But crucially, the pain we feel isn't a direct measure of the joint damage itself, not necessarily linked one-to-one with the X-ray. It's more about our body's perception of how vulnerable that joint is.
Yeah, that perception of vulnerability seems key.
And therefore, the most effective ways to manage it involve strategies like weight loss for both mechanical and inflammatory reasons, and targeted exercise to build sport, strengthen the area, and reduce that feeling of vulnerability.
Exactly. By focusing on these factors that we can actually influence weight, strength, activity, we can really empower ourselves to better manage osteoarthritis and, improve our quality of life significantly.
This has been a fantastic deep dive, really clarifying, and it leaves me with a final thought, maybe for you listening. Considering that pain, at least in this context, can be seen as a protective signal based on this perceived vulnerability in our joints. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other areas of our health and well-being might be influenced by our body's overall sense of strength and support, maybe even our mental sense of security, beyond just our physical joints? It's definitely something interesting to think about. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.